Hey everyone, welcome. So if you've ever written even a single line of Java, you know that it works, right? But today, we're actually going to look under the hood to see exactly how it works. I want you to think of the Java Virtual Machine, or JVM, as this incredibly sophisticated engine. Just like a car engine pulls in fuel, combusts it, and pushes out exhaust, the JVM intakes your code, runs it with just mind-blowing optimization, and then systematically cleans up the memory left behind. It's brilliant. So today, we're taking a deep dive right into the heart of this machinery.
Here is the roadmap for our explainer today. We'll start with 1. The magic of Java. 2. Anatomy of the JVM. 3. The class loader's subsystem. 4. Mapping Java's memory. 5. The execution engine. And finally, 6. The garbage collector.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the magic of Java.
Now, the foundational promise of Java has always been portability, that whole write once, run anywhere idea. And it actually pulls off this magic trick using something called JVM bytecode. See, when you compile your Java code, you're not compiling it directly into architecture-specific machine code that only, say, a Windows PC or a Mac can read. Instead, it gets compiled into this intermediate format, the bytecode. It's then the JVM's job, sitting there on whatever host hardware you have, to translate that bytecode on the fly. This is the exact mechanism that totally frees you from worrying about the specific hardware your software is eventually going to run on.
The other massive advantage of this engine is how it handles memory. If you've ever coded in C or C++, you absolutely know the nightmare of manual memory management. You have to explicitly allocate and then deallocate your memory. And if you forget, boom, you've got a fatal memory leak. Do it wrong, your whole program crashes. Java's automatic memory management completely shifts this burden away from you, the programmer, and hands it to the JVM. The built-in garbage collection system just quietly handles the heap in the background, which literally saves developers from catastrophic memory leaks and lets us focus on what actually matters, building cool features.
Moving right along to part 2, anatomy of the JVM.
Okay, let's dive into this blueprint. If we look at the macro view, the JVM is basically broken down into 3 major subsystems. Up at the top, we've got the class loader subsystem. Think of this as the intake manifold of our engine. It's what brings the raw class files into the system. Right in the middle, we have the various memory areas, which act like the engine's highly organized warehouse. And down at the bottom left, we find the execution engine. That's the combustion chamber, where the actual heavy lifting happens, all supported by the native method interface.
Let's look a little closer at that intake process. In part 3, the class loader subsystem.
So the class loader securely brings bytecode into the JVM, and it does this through 3 very distinct sequential steps. First up is loading. This is where the JVM reads the class files and stores their raw binary data, things like the class name and its methods, straight into the method area. Next is linking, which we'll break down more in just a second. And finally, initialization. This is where static variables are assigned their actual original values, and any static blocks of code are executed. And a quick fun fact, for every single loaded class file, the JVM creates exactly 1 class object in the heap to represent it.
Let's zoom in on that middle step, linking. You can really think of this as the JVM's strict security and prep checkpoint. Before any code goes a step further, the bytecode verifier jumps in to ensure the structural correctness of the file. Basically, if someone tampered with the compiled code, it fails right here on the spot with a verify error. Once that passes, preparation steps in to allocate memory for static variables, just setting them up with default values. Finally, resolution handles translating symbolic references into actual direct memory references. Absolutely no code gets to run until it passes through these checks.
Which brings us to part 4, mapping Java's memory.
Now, what's really interesting about this layout is the strict architectural separation between shared memory and thread-specific memory. The method area and the heap, those act as these massive shared pools for the entire application. But right above that, totally isolated inside each individual thread, T1, T2, all the way up to Tn, are dedicated stacks and PC registers. This setup is genius because it prevents threads from constantly stepping on each other's toes while still letting them tap into shared application data when they need it. To make this warehouse inventory crystal clear, the method area and heap area are shared by all your threads. The method area holds your core class definitions, while the heap is the Wild West where all your dynamic objects and arrays live, basically anything you create using that new keyword. On the flip side, you have the unshared thread-specific memory. This includes Java stacks, which are holding the local variables for your method calls, PC registers, which are literally just tracking the exact address of the next instruction to execute, and native stacks, which are set aside for executing C or C++ methods. It is a highly organized system.
All right, part 5, the execution engine.
Let's see how this builds on the memory architecture we just talked about. Once that bytecode is stored in memory, it gets passed right into the execution engine to be processed. This engine features a really cool dual-approach system. You've got an interpreter and a JIT compiler working right alongside the garbage collector. Now, the interpreter reads the bytecode line by line, which is fine, but the real horsepower, that comes from the JIT compiler block sitting right there in the middle.
So JIT stands for just-in-time compilation. Look, if the JVM only relied on an interpreter, it would be painfully slow, constantly retranslating the exact same loops over and over again. Instead, the JIT compiler actively monitors your code as it runs, it profiles it, and when it identifies a hotspot, like a block of code that runs repeatedly, it compiles that specific bytecode down into highly optimized native machine code on the fly. This real-time optimization magic is exactly what gives modern Java execution speeds that can actually rival compiled languages like C++. It's a total game changer.
And finally, part 6, the garbage collector.
The design of modern Java garbage collection is driven by this one fundamental principle called the weak generational hypothesis. It sounds super academic, but it's basically just a fancy term for a very simple assumption. Most objects you create in your code die extremely young. I mean, think about a local variable inside a quick math function. It's needed for maybe a fraction of a millisecond. And then, bam, it's garbage. And this brilliantly illustrates that exact idea. Notice that incredibly steep drop-off of object survival over time. Almost immediately after being instantiated, the vast majority of objects just become completely obsolete and drop out of use. Only a tiny fraction of them ever survive long enough to make it into the major collections phase.
Because the JVM designers knew about this massive drop-off, they decided to physically split the heap memory into generations. When you create a brand new object, it gets tossed right into the young generation. The garbage collector aggressively and frequently sweeps this specific area because, well, it expects to find a ton of dead objects there. But if an object happens to survive a few of these sweeps, it gets promoted to the old generation, sometimes called tenured space. The JVM checks this old generation way less often. Splitting the heap up like this vastly improves performance because the engine isn't wasting precious time constantly checking data that's probably going to live forever anyway.
Now, as amazing as the JVM engine is, the ecosystem around it is constantly evolving to solve new developer pain points. For example, Java has historically struggled with null pointer exceptions. People actually call it the billion-dollar mistake because it forces developers to write endless manual null checks. But because the JVM is designed to support multiple languages, we've seen modern languages like Kotlin step in. Kotlin compiles down to the exact same JVM bytecode we've been talking about, but it offers built-in null safety and non-nullable types right at the language level. It really just highlights how incredibly flexible and enduring the underlying JVM engine truly is.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. You now know exactly how your code is loaded, verified, organized in memory, compiled on the fly, and then systematically cleaned up. So I want to leave you with a question to chew on. How does understanding this internal engine change the way you'll write your very next line of code? Like, are you going to think differently about object creation now that you actually understand the young generation? Will you visualize those thread stacks the next time you write a method? Because understanding your tools at this deep architectural level, that is exactly what separates good developers from truly great ones. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep building.